to our hearts and give us hope. That your word may fortify us in faith, strengthen us in the paths of righteousness, and help us to be your people. Speak unto us this morning, whether through me or in spite of me, that we may be in your presence and hear your word. For this we pray. Amen. The book of Job is not one that is commonly a part of the lectionary or the preaching series. It's got a few problems in it, but it has also some wonderful insights. Now, as an introduction to Job, I want to point out to you that this is not meant to be a history. The story of Job is most likely made up. It is most likely a parable to try to teach principles rather than a factual account of a man that actually lived. And part of the way we can look at it is also even in our scripture this morning, we heard about what was going on in heaven with God and Satan. There's no human that would be able to know that, to write it down. And the way the story sounds, it doesn't really sound a lot like how God does things. God's probably not sitting up there and saying, "Oh, there's my good and faithful servant. Go ahead, Satan, do your worst to them just to prove to me that he's my good and faithful servant." That's a little sadistic and not really in line with what we know about God. However, I'm sure at times there are people, and times that maybe even we have felt like that's what God is doing. That as things go wrong in our lives, it may feel like we have been a people of faith, that we have been doing everything right, and suddenly all this is going on. So what's happened? Has God just decided to take some kind of bet or play some kind of game with us? And I don't think that that's really what's happening. But I do think that it is a common thing for us as people to kind of go into, to want to find a reason, a person to blame. And God is often such an easy target, along with Satan. The devil made me do it, or the devil has done this, or whatever. But I think what I really wanted to pull out of Job, and what this series that we're about to start is about, is how you can actually have someone who is good, who is upright, who's living life as a child of God, and living faithfully, and even amidst all of their faith and all of their righteousness and all of the things that they're doing right, the world can still collapse around them. And bad things still happen to good people. And I think the power of Job and the whole story is just how other people react to that and the things that they may say. And Job, through all of the other people's reactions, still kind of remains faithful to God, still places trust in God. And then we find that kind of at the end of this story that God has a way of making all things right. And I think that in the grand scheme of things and in the promises that Jesus makes to us, that's really what God does. That bad things may happen and we may go through the worst of the worst, but in the end, when we're faithful, come into God's presence and we find that God really does have the power to make all things right. To rewrite a world that is torn upside down by the forces of evil, or maybe just by happenstance. So here is where our story begins. Job is this upright man. He is a man of great faith. It says that he is so upright, he even sits and prays to God for his sons and daughters in case they may have sinned in the previous week. That he is so attuned to following God, so devout, that he has gathered God's attention, that God is so proud of him in the story. And we see from the story that Satan, that the forces of evil decide to tear him down, to say that no, there is no person that can be that devout, that without trying his faith, without hardship, you cannot know that he is truly that devout and faithful. And so Satan gets his chance to prove that in our story. And it says that all of Job's possessions, all of his holdings, his way of life, his job, is completely destroyed and taken away. All of his cattle, all of his sheep, everything that he has that helps him survive is taken away. And right as he's getting the news about all of that, suddenly a messenger comes and tells him, Job, all 7 of your sons and all 3 of your daughters have all been killed in a natural disaster. A great wind came and destroyed them all. And so here is Job facing financial ruin, facing great loss of his family. And even in that moment, in that place, it says that he gets down and worships God. That's pretty faithful. I think that's also part of why this is a story. I can't imagine too many of us, in light of losing everything that we have, losing our children or our loved ones, suddenly deciding in that moment that the right thing to do is sit down and praise God. It's not our natural response. But I think it's trying to show just how faithful, how good that Job was, and just how much bad things really can happen to good people. And so the story continues, and it says that Satan comes back to God, and God says, you took everything away from him. Everything. And he's still faithful to me. See how amazing he is. And Satan says, yeah, well, things don't matter, and family is important to some, but until you start messing with their health in their own life, you really won't know how faithful he is. So God says, okay. If you need to prove that to yourself, go ahead. Just don't kill him. And so Satan goes back down, and it says that he covers Job with these painful sores from the bottom of his feet to the crown of his head. That Job is left there bleeding and filled with infection and in pain. And he has to sit there and he's scratching himself all the time with what could be described as even worse than the worst case of poison ivy or the poison oak that you've ever imagined. And so Job is sitting there in a paper or burlap bag, and he's sitting in the ashes, and he's scratching everything all the time, and he's in constant pain, and he's still lost his children, and he's still lost everything that he's had. And even his wife comes out to him and says, give up on God. Clearly, you've angered him and he has abandoned you. And in fact, I can't sit there and watch you in this state. I'm leaving. I'm out. I'm gone. And so there Job sits in pain, in mourning, in poverty. And then his wife tells him he's leaving. And this is like the making of a country song right here. We can just put it all together right now. And he remains faithful. This is the beginning of Job's story. It's a almost heartbreaking story. I mean, if this person actually existed, can you imagine just how much emotional pain that he would be in with all of these things going on? I mean, there's grounds for him to be depressed. There's grounds for him to be angry. There's all of these things. And over the next couple of weeks, we're going to explore Job's reaction to everything that's going on. And I'll give you a hint. He always remains faithful. But we will see Job depressed. We will see Job angry and mad at God, asking God why him. And yet, he remains faithful. And through all of this, we will come back and we will find God. And Job comes face to face with God. So over the next couple of weeks, I hope that you will journey with me through the book of Job, and maybe on the other side of this journey, we too can be strengthened in a hope that no matter what may be happening in our lives in this world, that we can still trust in God. That no matter what pain and sorrow and struggle, that no matter how angry we may get with God or how depressed we may be, when we place our trust in God, God delivers. But for now, let us contemplate on Job. Perhaps even reflect on how some of the bad things that have happened in our lives may have caused us to struggle, caused us to feel a little bit like Job, so that we can prepare ourselves for the story yet to come.